Hi everybody! In this video, I'm going to be going through the notes for lesson 2.7. Our goal with this lesson is to learn how to write the equation of a line using point-slope form. Now this equation is really helpful whenever we have a line that does not have a nice y-intercept. Sometimes our y-intercept is a decimal or a fraction, and so it is not easy to use the equation y equals mx plus b because those are not nice numbers. This equation works great no matter what your starting point is. It doesn't have to be the y-intercept. As a matter of fact, it even works if you do have a nice y-intercept, but in that case, it's just easier to use slope-intercept form. Now, this equation has three numbers that we're going to need to fill in. The first number, or the first key feature that we're going to find is the starting point. And the starting point is any point that is on the line, and it has two parts, the x number and the y number. In the equation, the y number goes right next to the letter y at the beginning of the equation, and the x number goes right next to the letter x inside of the parentheses. The other thing we need to remember is that the x number is always the opposite of the number that we see. So if the number in our starting point is a positive, then the number we're going to put in our equation is a negative. If the number in our starting point is a negative, then the number in the equation is going to be a positive. The second key feature that we're going to find is the slope. And the slope is still going to be the letter m in the middle of the equation. In order to find the slope, we're going to still do rise over run, or depending on what information we're given, we might also do the y pattern divided by the x pattern. Once we identify our key features, our point and our slope, we are just going to practice filling those numbers in to the correct spots in the equation. So, step number one is to identify the key features. Remember, your starting point is going to have two numbers. It's going to have your x number, and it's also going to have your y number. In this table, we have lots of points to choose from. So let's just pick one that we like. I personally usually choose the first point in the table to use as my starting point. So my starting point would be 5, 10. Now, last time we learned that your x should always be 0 in order for it to be the y-intercept. The nice thing about point-slope form is that your x can be any number. It doesn't have to be the y-intercept in order to write this equation. We also need to figure out the slope. In order to figure out the slope, I'm going to look at the patterns in the table. The y side of the table is going up by 8, and the x side of the table is going down by 2. So I'm going to write 8 divided by -2, and on my calculator that simplifies to -4. Now I'm ready to put those numbers into the equation. Just like with y equals mx plus b, our y goes first. The first number I'm going to fill in is going to be that y number from the point. So my y number goes right after I wrote the letter y, which is going to be the number 10. The slope is in the middle of the equation, so -4 goes in the middle, and then there's a parentheses with an x in it. Now that x is going to be the opposite of the x number from the point. So since the x number from the point is a +5, my equation is going to say -5. because that number is going to be the opposite. That's it. Now, the interesting thing here is that if we choose a different starting point to use, it can give us a different equation for the same line. So we're talking about the same line when we make the graph. The equation just looks a little bit different. For example, let's suppose that we decided to use 3 and 18 as our starting point. Then our point would have been parentheses 3, 18. Our slope would still be the same slope because this table has the same pattern no matter what. So I know that my slope would be -4, which means that my equation would look like this. Y equals my y value, which is 18, and then my slope number, which is -4, and then parentheses x, and then I would fill in my x number. The only tricky thing is that my x number needs to be the opposite of the number that I wrote down. So if it's a +3, I would fill in a -3. Even though this equation that we wrote looks a little bit different than the other equation, they represent the same line on the graph. We just started the line in a different spot. We could do this for every single starting point. So for example, let's just do one more. Let's pretend that I chose this last point as my starting point. My point would be -1, 34. My slope would be the same slope. Even though we chose a different starting point, my slope is still -4. And my equation would look like this. Y equals my y value, which is 34, -4, because that's my slope number, parentheses x, and then my x number. Now remember, my x number has to be the opposite of the number I wrote down. So if this is a -1, the opposite would be +1. Let's try to write some equations. So in problem number 1, it says write the equation of the line going through, and then it gives me a starting point and a slope. Now the key features for my equations are going to be a point and a slope. The nice thing is that in this problem, they told me the point, which is 5, -3, and they told me the slope, that m is 2. All that I need to do is put those numbers together in the equation in the right spots. So I'm going to start with the letter y equals, then I'm going to put my y number, which is -3. My slope number goes in the middle of the equation, parentheses x, and then I'm going to fill in my x number. But my x number is going to be the opposite. So instead of writing x + 5, I'm going to write x - 5. And I'm done. Let's try that again, but let's use 2 points instead of a starting point and a slope as our given information. So problem number 2 says write the equation going through these 2 points. Whenever I'm given 2 points, I know I'm going to make a little mini table so that it's easier to find the slope. My first point is -8, -5, and my second point is -2, -1. Now I still need to identify a starting point and a slope as my key features. My starting point can be either one of the points from the table. I'm going to use the first one. That's just my habit that I like to do. I always like to use the first one. But you would be okay if you use the second one. Your answer would still be correct. Now my slope in a table, I have to find the patterns. So from -5 to -1, I'm going up by 4. And from -8 to -2, I'm going up by 6. So my slope would be 4 over 6, which simplifies to 2/3 when I type that into my calculator. Now I'm going to have y equals, and then I'm going to write down my y value, which is a -5. And then my slope number, which is 2/3, and then parentheses x, and then my x number. Now remember, the x number needs to be the opposite. So instead of writing -8, I'm going to write +8. And I'm done. Let's try that again. So in this table, I'm going to need to use the table to find the key features. I'm going to need a starting point, and I'm going to need a slope. I can choose any starting point from this table. I'm going to choose the first one because that's just my habit. I always choose the first one, but it would be okay to choose any of these starting points. My slope, I need to find my patterns in the table. So on the y side of the table, I'm going up by 6. And on the x side of the table, I'm going up by 2, which means my slope is 6 over 2, and that simplifies. If I type it into my calculator, it makes 3. Then I'm going to write my equation. Y equals my y value, which is -6. Then my slope number, so +3, and then parentheses x. And inside of the parentheses, I'm going to put the x number, but I'm going to make it the opposite. So instead of +8, I'm going to write -8 inside of my parentheses. For problem number 4, again, we need to find the key features. So we're going to need a point and we're going to need a slope. This graph is a great example of the reason we need this style of equation. If you look at the y-intercept here, it is not a nice number. It would be somewhere in between 1 and 2, and we are not allowed to estimate that number. So we would really just be guessing. Instead, we have to choose a different starting point. I'm going to start by finding some nice points on the graph, and I'm going to use this guy right here as my starting point. So my starting point would be 1, 3. Now my slope, I need to do rise over run. So to move between these points, I would rise 3, run 2, which means my slope would be 3 over 2. Now I'm going to write my equation. Y equals my y value, which is 3, plus 3 over 2, my slope, parentheses x, and then I'm going to fill in my x number. But my x number is going to have to be the opposite of the number that I see. So instead of writing +1, I'm going to write -1. Last but not least, let's put it all together in one problem. So let's start with reading the table. This table is telling me about the day and the number of students wearing hoodies at school. Write the equation of the line. So let's start with the key features, a point and a slope. My starting point can be any of the points in the table. I'm going to use the 12 and the 16. My slope I need to find by finding the patterns in the table. On the right-hand side, the numbers are going down by 2, and on the left-hand side, the days are going up by 8. So my slope would be -2 over 8, which on my calculator simplifies to -1 over 4. Then I can write my equation. Y equals, and then we start with the y number, which is 16, and then the slope number, which is -1 over 4, parentheses x, and then the x number, which is 12. but that number needs to be the opposite. So instead of writing plus 12, I'm going to write minus 12. And that's my equation. To interpret the slope means to use the words from the table. So the Y pattern is talking about the number of students, and the X pattern is talking about the days. To interpret the slope, I would say 1 less student every 4 days. Then it says use the equation, so I'm telling you to use the equation that you wrote to find the number of students on day 4. Now in this table, days are the X's. So all this is asking me to do is plug in the number 4 in my equation. I'm going to write down what I'm going to type into my calculator. Y equals 16 minus 1/4 parentheses 4 minus 12. When I do that, I get Y equals 18. Now, in this case, we're measuring the number of students who are wearing hoodies. So I would say 18 students. Last but not least, we're going to interpret the circled points. Now, it's a little confusing because I circled a point, but the original circled point was the 20 and the 14. 20 is going to be the days, and 14 is going to be the students. So I would say after 20 days, 14 students were wearing hoodies. All right, that's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Let's start our practice.